A Wednesday afternoon here. If you have a question for us at Catholic Answers Live, call 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884 is the number to call. Today we are talking about the Eucharist, the source and summit of our Catholic faith. If you have any question that you would like to ask us about, call that number, 888-318-7884. Any number you have, any question you want to ask us about the Eucharist. Why do Catholics believe what we believe about the Eucharist? What do we believe about the Eucharist? Why does our beliefs about the Eucharist differ from those of other Christians? Where did our beliefs about the Eucharist come from? Any question you have about the Eucharist, 888-318-7884. I am your fill-in host, Thomas Graff. My usual job here at Catholic Answers is to man the social media platforms, but I'm taking a break today because your usual host, Cy Kellett, is off today. He is traveling. He is in North Carolina right now to interview a very special guest. I won't reveal who it is on air, but it is a very, very special guest. You guys will be very excited to see who it is when that interview premieres on the Cy Kellett Show channel on YouTube. That's the Cy Kellett Show. That will be that will be where that interview airs. Not on Catholic Answers Live, but it will be coming up soon. We'll let you guys know as soon as we have a premiere date for that. That's where Cy Kellett is. He's in North Carolina doing a great interview. Today, as I said, I am here hosting with you guys the show about the Eucharist, 888-318-7884. And to answer those questions that you have about the Eucharist is the fellow who wrote the book on the Eucharist, or maybe less audaciously wrote a book on the Eucharist for us, titled The Eucharist is Really Jesus. He's also written a number of books. He's written a book about the early church called The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. He's written a book about the Pope called Pope Peter, and he does a lot of really, really great work for us, including appearing on this show. Joe Heschmeyer, welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Happy to have you.
Thanks. Good to be back.
So, Joe, it's fortuitous that we are talking about the Eucharist today because, as I said, you wrote the book that we wrote our most prominent book on the Eucharist that we sell. The Eucharist is Really Jesus, and anyone can get that right now whenever they want at shop.catholic.com. And since it's the source and summit of our faith, it's really important that we understand it as well as we can, because the more we understand the Eucharist, the more we can give it the love that it really deserves, since, as your title says, the Eucharist is really Jesus. We want to love Jesus the way he deserves. We should understand him as best we can. So maybe one question we could start with before we get to our callers, who are already lighting up the phones, by the way. So maybe one question we could begin with. We say the Eucharist is really Jesus, so that means Jesus is present in the Eucharist to us somehow. But how exactly is Jesus present in the Eucharist to us?
Yeah, he's present to us bodily, but that's going to be confusing to people because we also know that his body is at the right hand of the Father in heaven. So how can he be bodily present in all of the tabernacles on earth, at every altar, at every Mass? How is that possible? In every host, you have the transformation of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, and individual people receive. How do you not run out of Jesus? How is there not a diminution of Christ? Something like this. This is a problem that the early Christians addressed head on. Now, this is actually significant. So I would say if you are grappling with that, you should at least know that Christians in the early days of Christianity addressed this objection, which tells you you're right on the right track, because this tells you you're talking about the real, authentic, historical belief on the Eucharist. You know, these days, if you said, what do Christians believe about the Eucharist? There's not a Christian consensus about the Eucharist. The vast majority of Christians are Catholics or Orthodox and believe in the real presence of Christ, that it becomes his body and blood by a process we Catholics call transubstantiation. But you have a bunch of different views among our Protestant brothers and sisters. Among the early Christians, there's a remarkable unanimity that they believe this really is Jesus bodily. And one of the questions that they're dealing with is, how can he be present in all of these ways? Now, there's a technical kind of answer to this, and it involves what's called modes of presence. So let me just say this. Jesus is present in different ways throughout all the universe. So in one sense, he is holding the cosmos together in himself. In one sense, he is present in the least of these. In one sense, he is present where two or three are gathered in his name. In one sense, he is present while he is walking the shores of Galilee and is now seated at the right hand of the Father in heaven. That's what's called his local presence. And so he can be present in a bunch of different ways. And he's able to make his body present sacramentally in the Eucharist. Now, you and I can't do that. That's beyond the power of our bodies. This is, by definition, miraculous. But one of the points that the early Christians hasten to make is, it's not surprising to see Jesus's body behaving in miraculous ways, both because it is the body of the second person of the Holy Trinity, God himself, but also because from the very beginning, Jesus's body is virgin born. It doesn't behave like ordinary bodies. That even though he is fully man, his manhood, his humanity, is derived from a woman, and yet he is masculine. He doesn't have a father, but he is a human father, but he is male. Like biologically, it defies everything that is possible by nature alone. And so if his body is itself supernatural, then it's not surprising that his body is made present in a supernatural way in the Eucharist. So all that's to say, people who say, well, Jesus can't be present in all the tabernacles, he can't be at every altar, he can't be in every host, this is equivalent to saying, well, to do that, you would need a miracle. And we would agree. It is miraculous. It's not the normal state of bodies to be present in a sacramental way like this.
Yeah, if you know what else we believe about Jesus in general, it shouldn't be it shouldn't be too much more of a stretch compared to what we already believe to
and
believe
not
something
just
like
we,
that.
something like this is an area where on all these other things, like Jesus's body rose from the dead,
Mm-hmm.
Catholics and Protestants are going to agree. And so if you're willing to accept that he can be virgin born, that he can, work miracles through his body, that he can rise from the dead, it's not a stretch to say he can also make himself bodily present in what had previously been bread and wine.
Yeah, I can remember Tim Staples saying on this show a long time ago. Once he was recounting the Catholic who converted him, Tim Staples, from Protestantism, and at one point Tim and this friend of his, Matt, were having an argument over the Eucharist, and Tim, then Protestant, said, "How could Jesus possibly do that? There's no way that Jesus could do that." And his buddy Matt said, "Tim, you think God can't do that?" Let's take a step back and remember who we're
Right.
talking about here when we get into this question.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of stuff like this. I mean, you find this strangely in a fair amount of scholarship as well, where people say, well, Jesus couldn't have predicted the destruction of the temple because it didn't happen for another 40 years. And besides the fact that people do actually make predictions sometimes, and those predictions are sometimes correct, even in an unaided sort of way, people can just understand, hey, we're ticking off the Romans, they might destroy the temple. There's also the fact that, yeah, he's God. It's not surprising he can do supernatural things. So anytime an objection amounts to, but that would be a miracle, to something we already realize is miraculous, it's just not a very strong objection intellectually. It might have some emotional weight. People might still balk at it, but we should at least recognize it's not a logical objection to the thing that we believe.
Yeah. Yes, we Christians would respond to any objection like that with the yes meme. Just, yes, it's a
Yes,
miracle.
exactly.
You get it. Thank you. Well,
Yep.
thank you very much, Joe, for kicking us off with that, with the great answer to that question. That tees us right up for our first break. So we will get into our first break in just a second here and get to the bevy of callers who are filling up our phone lines now. Very excited to talk to Joe. Before we do that, I do want to let you know again that we are pushing a lot of copies, selling a lot of copies of this relatively new book we have, How to Talk About Jesus with Anyone, by our normal host, Cy Kellett, and also by Steve Dawson, co-founder of St. Paul Street Evangelization, a great, great Catholic evangelization apostolate. I mean, the two of them together have seen countless souls brought back to Christ, or at least brought on the way back to Christ through their evangelization efforts. And so they are two excellent people to talk about this topic, how to talk about Jesus with anyone. And right now, we have a site set up, talkaboutjesusbook.com. You type that in, talkaboutjesusbook.com, and there you can order the book in a single, you can order the book in bulk, you can order it for your parish, you can order it in all sorts of different ways. to not only get the word out about Jesus, but teach other people how to get the word out about Jesus, how to fulfill this call to evangelize. So go to talkaboutjesusbook.com, find all the ways that you can spread the word about Jesus even more effectively and get other people to do so as well. We will be right back to begin taking calls on the Eucharist right after this.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Are you ready to spread your wings? Wings is the weekly newsletter that's packed with exclusive news, program information, features, and updates of all that's going on at the Global Catholic Network. To sign up, go to EWTN.com, click subscribe, enter your name and email address, and you'll start getting your wings every week. Get your wings today. It's the weekly newsletter from EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Thomas Graff here, fill-in hosting for Cy Kellett as he is on the road. He'll be back with you tomorrow and Friday in pre-record form, and then he'll be back with you in person on Monday. But for now, I am here hosting with you, and our guest is Joe Heschmeyer, here to take questions on the Eucharist, the source and summit of our faith. I neglected to mention in the open that, of course, Joe Heschmeyer, in addition to all the writing and radio show guesting that he does for us, he also is the host of a twice-a-week podcast and YouTube channel, Shameless Popery, and I was remarking to him over the break how much I enjoyed one of the last couple episodes he put out on proving that I don't remember the exact title, but it was proving that the Catholic priesthood is biblical. Was it something like that?
Yeah, it was something like that. I also don't remember the exact wording, but I think
Great.
If you look up Shameless Popery, it'll be one of the most recent episodes. And
yeah.
You'll see the title and say, that's what those guys were trying to remember.
That's probably it. Neither of us are in charge of coming up with the title of
true.
Joe's episodes. So he'll probably message me later to let me know. But it was a fantastic episode, a real tour de force, just starting with a reply to a Protestant creator who was criticizing the Catholic priesthood, saying it was unbiblical. And Joe pulled from so many different directions in the Bible to weave together this portrait of a really rock-solid biblical foundation for the Catholic priesthood. I felt like I'd just watched a really satisfying movie at the end of it.
Thanks. I appreciate that a lot. It was a topic I'd been wanting to talk about already. And so then when that video came out and these common accusations against the priesthood were made, this idea, because the temple veil is torn, we just go directly to Christ and therefore we don't need priests, or we're a nation of priests and therefore we don't need priests. It's very much the usual stuff. We've got one mediator, so we don't need priests. If you've heard any of those objections, I'm trying to answer all of those. And it was nice to have kind of the space to answer each one kind of in turn and show how there's a lot that we actually agree with. We are a nation of priests. We can go directly to God. Christ is the one mediator. And yet we also were told to intercede, and yet we also were given this priesthood. All of these things can be true at once and are true. And the Bible is clear that they're true. The early Christians are clear that these things are all true. And so when you see how it all coheres, I think it's a much more coherent understanding of Christianity and of the Bible than many people have as they kind of oppose the priesthood.
Agreed. So if anyone listening ever hears those objections trotted out against the Catholic priesthood, you know what to look for. Shameless Popery on YouTube and Catholic priesthood biblical. Any of those keywords should get you to the video that we're talking about. And on that note, let's turn to another thing that we love talking about, which is the Eucharist. Thank you all on the lines for your patience. We're getting to you right now. Christian in New Orleans is listening on the Catholic Answers app. Christian, thank you for kicking us off today. What is your question for Joe Heschmeyer?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to start by saying that I love listening to Joe's videos. Every Tuesday and Thursday, it's the highlight of my morning. I watch every single one of them. I try and pay attention most of the time. But my question for today is, so I've done a bit of research into why the Eucharist is not cannibalism. And I am a Catholic. I believe that it's not cannibalism. But I find that the answers given by most common apologetics are pretty lacking. One that I read recently in an article, which I really didn't like, was very unsatisfying to me, was that it doesn't fit the definition of cannibalism because it's non-destructive. And that's the usual apologetic that I hear. The problem that I feel with that is destruction is not inherent to any definition I'm aware of for cannibalism. Usually the definition is like the eating of the body of another person. So, for example, I would think it would still be cannibalism if, say, I cut off someone's arm and ate the arm, even if the person was still alive.
Well, in that case, it would still be destructive.
Yes, I suppose it would be destructive. Where my head was going with that was some people say, like, if you bite off your fingernails and eat that, that's not cannibalism. But say biting off some skin on your lip or something, and you consume that, is that cannibalism? Whereas eating someone's arm, that's very clearly cannibalism. So I'm wondering, how do we get this definition that the Eucharist is not cannibalism, and how it feels to me when people say that it's inherently destructive when we use the term cannibalism. It feels almost like a definition is being invented in order to make the Eucharist not cannibalism, if that makes sense. I guess I don't know where the idea originates.
Right. I think there's a few places. The early Christians contested the accusation of cannibalism, partly because what people have in mind when they say cannibalism isn't something like chewing your fingernails. Like if somebody chews their fingernails, I think it would be insane to call them a cannibal. And so I think the example you gave is a perfectly reasonable one. But why are they not a cannibal? Well, part of that reason seems to be it's non-destructive because fingernails grow back, whereas eating an arm is destructive because an arm doesn't grow back. And so we're sort of reaching for what this principle is. Like, leave the Eucharist out of the question for a moment and say, why do we regard the eating of fingernail tips, or maybe even the little tip of the skin at the end of the finger, somebody does that, we don't ordinarily sincerely call that person a cannibal. And the reason seems to be because you're not destroying the body. Is that fair, or is there another principle that we should be looking for there?
I suppose it can be fair. I understand what you're saying. You're trying to get to like the philosophical root of what it means for something to be cannibalistic. I guess, so if the principle is the thing grows back, and so therefore it, but I don't want to put those words into your mouth,
no, I'm not saying it's because the thing grows back. I'm saying because the thing grows back, this is a sign that it's not destructive. Like, it doesn't destroy. Like, if you were to eat someone's arm, they just don't have an arm anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But if you were to chew the tip of your fingernails. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Let's say we have a situation where someone, it's not a whole arm. Say they eat like a 2-inch square of skin on someone's arm, something like that. This is getting kind of gross, but
it is.
Something like that would, in theory, grow back. It might be scarred. So is that kind of why we're not extending it that far? Because something is still destroyed. It's not the same as it should.
Yeah, there you're doing some real damage. So here, there's no damage being done. Either reversible or irreversible kind of damage. Like the person who chews their fingernails, I think even in the case, like if somebody chewed a fingernail completely off, we would regard that as, if not cannibalism, at least something like it. Because there you're doing some actual destruction to the finger. Whereas someone who chews like the tips of their fingernails, nothing is being destroyed. Now, something is literally being destroyed because you're still taking organic matter and chewing it up. And so the Eucharist is not even as destructive as the chewing of fingernails, because nothing is being destroyed. That even when you eat the flesh of Christ, the early Christians like Gregory of Nyssa were clear, you don't metabolize him into your body so much as he metabolizes you into his body. As St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10, we are one body because we partake of the one loaf. That idea is like we are being transformed into his body. And even there, it's not a destruction, it's a glorification and an elevation. So it's radically misleading to call that cannibalism, in much the same way that, referring to the crucifixion as human sacrifice, Christianity is a human sacrifice religion, would be radically misleading. Like, you could find a definition of human sacrifice that Christianity and Aztec religion both fit. But to pretend those are the same thing is not honest or accurate. And similarly, acting as if it's the same, to commit the crime of like destroying and eating someone's flesh or receiving Christ in the Eucharist, those seem to me to be night and day different. And even church fathers like Augustine point out that when Jesus prohibits the carnal sense of interpretation in John 6, he's referring to things like imagining that they need to cannibalize him or that they need to commit a crime. And so you don't understand his Eucharistic teaching in such a way to give rise to, you need to, cut up my body and kill me right now. That sort of thing. Jesus isn't saying that. And as a result, we aren't, we've always protested the charge of cannibalism. Nevertheless, I guess the last thing maybe worth saying here is this. The early Christians were accused of cannibalism. And so to anyone listening, if your own Eucharistic theology isn't accused of cannibalism, if it sounds so vague and symbolic and fluffy that it can't be mistaken for cannibalism, then I think you've got a real problem that it's not the theology that the early Christians had. Because we know from early pagan arguments against Christianity that one of the grounds on which Christianity was rejected was a belief in cannibalism.
Christian, thanks so much for starting us off. Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Christian. You can get the last, you can say one more thing.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much for that answer. I will shortly be on my way to teach an OCIA class on the Eucharist.
Glory.
So that's kind of why I wanted to know.
Perfect.
And secondly, I've heard many times people say what you just said. We know the early Christians were accused of cannibalism, and so that's one of the reasons that we know the Catholic view of the Eucharist is correct. Would you be able to suggest any early church fathers who I could look to who answer that charge in kind of the sort of ways that you described in this conversation? Because I always hear that they talked about it, but I never knew where to look.
The thing that I'm thinking of immediately in terms of where they talk about it, I believe Justin Martyr mentions it once, and then there's a work called Octavius by Municius Felix, where it's a dialogue, and this is brought up. They don't go into the subtle kind of arguments about like why receiving the flesh of Jesus isn't cannibalism because of the destructive part. They don't make that argument, but they're very clear that they're being misrepresented for or being accused of cannibalism. One is the Roman charge in particular seems to have been a real muddle. They thought that we put the baby in the manger, basically covered him with grain and then ate him. And so you can imagine the elements of Christianity they're muddling together there. And because this is a family show, I won't explain how the Romans misunderstood the love feast component of the agape meal. But they took it in a very different direction than Christianity actually practiced. So those were the kind of charges that are brought up in Octavius. And you can find other ones kind of throughout early Christian writings.
Thank you.
Christian, thank you so much for starting us off today. That was a great conversation. I wish we could carry it on further, but as I said before, we do have a lot of people on the air who are ready and eager to speak to Joe Heschmeyer. Joe, I thought it was interesting how you said if your Eucharistic theology isn't easily mistaken for cannibalism, then it's probably not what it is. It almost sounded like what you said earlier, where if people are saying that sounds like your Eucharistic theology requires a miracle, then you should say yes, that is it. Also, that sounds like cannibalism. Well, Yes, almost. It's very close.
Yes. At least you're on the right track. If you're making the same myth judgment that so many people have made throughout the ages, at least that's a sign that I'm believing the same thing that they believed. I mean, it's at least a good indication.
That's right. I'm glad we're steering you in the right direction. Now let me steer you in precisely the correct direction. Exactly. All right. Well, that wraps up this segment. We're going to have to go back to another break in just a second here, as you can hear the music coming in. But we have lots more calls with Joe Heschmeyer about the Eucharist. So call another line open up, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884 if you want to get your question answered. We will be right back, as I said, right after this.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Throughout history, some Catholics have been among the worst kind of villains, right? Or were they? In Cancelled, historian Steve Weidenkopf digs into the lives and controversies of some of these Catholics whose reputations have been blackened, often unfairly. He takes on the anti-Catholic versions of history and defends not only these figures, but the faith they represent. Order your copy of Cancelled today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What is the Catholic Church? Everybody seems to have an opinion, but the church never quite fits into the boxes people try to make for it. In The Faith Unboxed, author Andrew Petiprin looks at some of the most common boxes people put the Catholic Church in and explains why they don't fit. In doing so, he brings us closer to what the church really is, the institution founded by Christ. Order The Faith Unboxed today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Thomas Graff, social media manager here, filling in for Cy Kellett as we take calls on the Eucharist. And answering those calls is our very own speaker, podcaster, debater, and author of books like The Eucharist is Really Jesus, Joe Heschmeyer. Joe Heschmeyer, I'm fascinated to learn that eating fingernails is closer to consuming the Eucharist than to actual cannibalism. That's one of the many fun things you learn from this show.
I'm just saying, if there's a spectrum,
yes,
on the spectrum of cannibalism, the Eucharist is further in the not cannibalistic direction than even eating fingernails.
Cannibalism is a spectrum. Another fantastic take from this show. Looking forward to that Shameless Popery episode to come also. In the meantime,
you know what, you kid? One of the first law school cases I had to study was Regina v. Dudley and Moore, I believe is the name of it, which is a notorious British case that involves that theme. I won't get into any of the details, but it was stomach-turning.
Awesome. I mean, there's only one thing that could get us more arcane knowledge than a Catholic apologetics show, and that's just the study of law. So let's not go down that rabbit hole for now. Instead, let's go to South Carolina.
Good.
Let's go to South Carolina, where Colin has been patiently waiting, watching on YouTube. Colin, thank you for waiting. You are on the air right now with Joe Heschmeyer.
Hey, guys. Thank you for having me.
Happy to have you.
Yeah. Thanks for calling, Colin.
My question is kind of in regards to the Eucharist, kind of in regards to like Catholicism in general. So I grew up in a very traditional Anglican church. I'm 21 years old. I really haven't been into reading scripture up until the last 2 years, and I found the closer I get to Jesus and the more deep I get in Scripture, the more my beliefs align with Catholicism and the more I disagree with the church I go to. My problem is the only person I attend church with is my grandma, and I've attended plenty of Catholic churches around the Charleston area, and the big problem is like I want to go through with the OCIA, but I also don't want to kind of blow off my grandma. And there's obviously solutions to it, like going to an earlier mass and then attending my Anglican church with my grandma. The question I have is really related to the Eucharist, about it being wrong or it being a sin for me in the future if I become Catholic to receive communion at my Anglican church.
That's a great question. And I like that you've already thought through some of the logistics, because I think you're doing a good thing going to church with your grandma. And even though it's not in communion with the Catholic Church, the kind of respect you're paying to your elders, and particularly to your grandma, is something that is worthy of honor. So I'm not suggesting you immediately burn bridges. I do think it's important to stress that our fidelity to Christ is even greater than our fidelity to our parents and our grandparents. And Jesus is abundantly clear about this. If we don't hate father and mother in comparison to our love for him, then we're not worthy to follow him. So if he's calling you into the Catholic Church, I would say be bold. Go wherever he wants you to go, whatever the cost. That said, as you say, the fact that you seem to be kind of getting drawn into the Catholic Church doesn't mean you have to leave your grandma out to dry. You can certainly invite her with you to Mass. She may not say yes. You can invite her with you to Mass. You can also attend, Anglican church with her. But then, as you say, there's this question of communion. And here's the thing. Communion is both a communion with Christ and a communion with the church. And we see this both from Scripture and from the writings of the early Christians. I've already mentioned 1 Corinthians 10 earlier, that we are one body because we partake of the one loaf, that the church is formed in a certain way from the Eucharist. Ignatius of Antioch, writing about 107, writes to the church in Smyrna, and he warns them about a group of heretics, presumably the Docetist Gnostics, doesn't matter. And he mentions that because they confess not our Savior Jesus Christ, to have nothing to do with them. And his point is that, we can't be in communion with them because they don't believe in the Eucharist. And this is our communion. And so someone who doesn't believe in the Catholic Eucharist, who's not part of the Catholic communion, we can't celebrate this communion together because we're not in the kind of communion that God wants us to be in yet. Now, there are certain exceptions we make when there is substantially close communion, as with the Orthodox and churches like that. But Anglicanism isn't close enough, and the church has been very clear. So you wouldn't be able to receive because you're not in the Anglican communion, God willing, if you become Catholic. And your grandma wouldn't be able to receive in the Catholic Church unless she entered into the Catholic communion. That communion signifies something deep about our allegiance both to Christ the head and the church his body, and our membership and our participation in our communion therein. Does that make sense, Colin?
Yeah,
I know it's probably not what
does.
you wanted to hear.
No, it does. And funny enough, she actually grew up Catholic. So she's baptized and confirmed Catholic. And a long time ago, she started going to our local Anglican church where I was baptized, where it was right around the time where I was born. And she's just been there my whole life. But I think there's definitely some persuasion to do. It's a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you bring your grandma with you, then this whole problem goes away in a split. So,
yeah.
All right, Colin, thanks for calling, and God bless you on your journey as you continue to explore the Catholic faith. We hope you come all the way home, and please do continue to call us anytime you have a question. We would love to help you along.
All right, sounds good.
It's a call-in show.
It is a call-in show, and you are welcome to call in, Colin.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's move right along. Got lots of folks on the line. Go to Miguel, calling from Norfolk, Virginia, watching us on YouTube. Miguel, you are on the air with Joe Heschmeyer. Go ahead with your question.
Awesome. Thanks. Hey, Joe. My question is, I know that there are Protestants who believe in the real presence, right? So Lutherans, I think maybe Anglican as well, or some version of real presence that's distinct from the Catholic view in some ways. But these Christians don't have a sacramental priesthood, or at least a Catholic understanding of the minister, right, who presides, over the bread and wine in their respective services. So my question is, what role, if any, does the Catholic view of or a sacramental priesthood have on the reality of Jesus actually being made present at Mass with the words of consecration? And how does that then compare to the Protestant kind of understanding or lack of a sacramental priesthood?
Yeah, I appreciate you raising this, because I think many times Catholics kind of assume all Protestants are memorialist kind of Baptists, and that's true for a lot of evangelicals, for a lot of Baptists, for a lot of non-denominationals, but it's certainly not true for all Protestants. And there are Protestants who have a much richer, more nuanced theology of the Eucharist, and Anglicans and Episcopalians and Lutherans are at the top of that list. What makes it difficult, as you say, is they don't have a valid priesthood. And we could get into all of the ins and outs of it, but I'll give you the short version. Jesus, when he gives the power to celebrate the Eucharist, doesn't give it to all of his followers. He specifically gives it to the 12 at the Last Supper, and he tells them, do this in memory of me. And so they're given that commission. You and I, as laymen, are not given that commission. And so we're unable to celebrate the Mass. And if I tomorrow defected and became a Lutheran and became a Lutheran priest, I'm still a layman, and I therefore can't celebrate the Mass. So to be able to consecrate the Eucharist, you have to have holy orders. And Lutherans, Anglicans, they broke off apostolic succession. They rejected the traditional Catholic rite of ordination. Luther rejects the belief that only priests can offer the Eucharistic sacrifice. And so they very deliberately and intentionally break away from this lineage that they'd been a part of. Luther was a Catholic priest. He could say the Mass. The Anglicans who defected, those bishops and priests, they could celebrate Mass. It's after them, because they changed the rite of ordination, that they're no longer attempting to ordain Catholic priests. They're now attempting to ordain what are essentially Protestant ministers. And Protestant minister isn't a valid sacrament. It's not a real thing. There is no sacrament that bestows any special authority to a Protestant minister. And frankly, as far as I understand, a Lutheran would say in an emergency, anyone can celebrate the Mass. So they recognize that their clergy don't have any authority that a layman doesn't have. Well, if you're a layman, you can't say the Mass. You can't celebrate Mass. You can't offer that sacrifice. Because what a priest is, definitionally, is one who offers sacrifice. And Scripture is very clear that the Eucharist is a sacrifice. St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 compares it to those who partake of the temple sacrifices in Jerusalem, and then those who partake of the pagan food sacrifices. That's how he understands how it is we participate in the body and blood of Christ, in the Eucharist. So that idea that this is a sacrifice, therefore it needs a priesthood, this priesthood is rejected, therefore you can't offer the sacrifice of the Mass, is important for why we can't just say, oh, well, your thing is as good as our thing. Because it isn't. We have the actual sacramental authority to offer this. They deliberately rejected that authority and can't recover it now. Now, having said all of that, it is nevertheless true that even though they don't have the real presence, God can make himself present in whatever way he wants. Christ can be present in ways that are actually helpful in their journey to salvation. Meaning, if you have, say, a Lutheran community that's gathering together and they're trying to offer the Mass and they don't understand all of this theology of priesthood, they don't understand the theology of sacrifice, they don't understand, maybe the whole history of the Reformation. You have places, like in Scandinavia, where people have been Lutheran for centuries now, and They're not even consciously breaking from the Catholic Church. It's all they've ever known. We can recognize that God can be present there in whatever way he wants to be. They don't have holy orders. It doesn't work ex opere operato, technical terms. But as then Cardinal Ratzinger pointed out in 1983, he says even a theology oriented to the concept of succession, he means their apostolic succession, such as that which holds in the Orthodox Church and in the Catholic Church, need not in any way deny the salvation-granting presence of the Lord in a Lutheran Lord's Supper. Now that might sound like, how can we say that if we just said they don't have a valid priesthood? Well, remember, where 2 or 3 are gathered in Christ's name, he promises to be there. So we don't have to say, because you don't have the Eucharist, you don't have the real presence, therefore you have nothing. Christ can still show up and seems to promise he will show up. But on his terms, not on the terms sort of created by Lutheran or Anglican theology.
Miguel, how does that sound?
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks. And I appreciate the qualification. I didn't realize then Cardinal Ratzinger had said that. So that's really neat. Yeah, thanks so much, Joe.
Yeah, you bet. I appreciate the call.
Yeah, where did that Ratzinger quote come from again, Joe?
It was a 1983 letter that he wrote to a Lutheran bishop, or, bishop.
Okay, sounds good if anyone wants to look that up for themselves. That opens up a line. 888-318-7884 is the number to call if you have a question for Joe Heschmeyer about the Eucharist. Joe, I got to warn you, there's a jump scare coming in 3, 2, 1. Lent is in less than a month. Gosh,
Wow.
sorry for scaring everyone out there. Lent is, in fact, in less than a month. Ash Wednesday is February 18th. So, question for everyone out there, what are you doing for Lent this year? Maybe a Bible study, spiritual reading, sharpening your apologetic skills, perhaps reading 1 or 2 or 3 Joe Heschmeyer books. In any case,
That sounds penitential.
that does sound penitential, especially like the earlier caller. If you have a really hard time paying attention to them, that's penitential, all right. But we can help. Visit shop.catholic.com right now, where we've got a store-wide discount going on. 26% off, a whopping 26% off discount store-wide. Best store-wide discount of this type we've ever offered, but it ends on Sunday, 5 days from now. It ends on Sunday. So if you have an idea for how you want to spend your Lent, either with spiritual reading or with more academic apologetic reading, we can help. Shop.catholic.com is the place to go. Take advantage of the 26% off store-wide sale. Remember, it ends on Sunday at shop.catholic.com. What you have to do is use the promo code SAVE26, SAVE26, SAVE26 at checkout to save 26% off on anything store-wide. Once again, that's shop.catholic.com. Prepare for Lent because it is sneaking up on us faster and faster every single day. We will be right back after this to answer more questions about the Eucharist on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Want the latest pro-life news? Want it delivered? Sign up. It's free. EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your source for everything happening now in the fight to protect the sanctity of human life. New episodes delivered every week to your inbox. So if you really want to know,
Sign up today.
go to EWTN.com/pro-life today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Having a great time here, filling in for Cy Kellett. My name's Thomas Graff. I usually man the social media for Catholic Answers. Today I'm filling in for Cy Kellett while he is traveling, still getting work done on the road, and he will be back with you in pre-record form tomorrow and in person next week. We're taking calls on the Eucharist, and answering them for us is Joe Heschmeyer, author of The Eucharist is Really Jesus, and a slew of other books and articles that he's written for us at Catholic Answers. On Catholic.com, you can find lots of his online articles. On YouTube, you can find Shameless Popery. And at shop.catholic.com, as you heard before the break, you can find the Eucharist is really Jesus. And our next caller is calling from Hastings, Michigan. Aaron from Hastings, Michigan is watching us on YouTube. Aaron, thanks so much for calling in. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call. My question is, how is the Eucharist really Jesus when most of the Christian sects, like the Presbyterians and Baptists and all them, think that it's more of a symbol?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure you should determine the truth based on the number of different Protestant denominations teaching different things. Like, for one thing, if you imagine Christianity as a pie chart, now I don't think for starters you're going to determine truth by just majority vote. But if you wanted to take that line of reasoning and you were to take all of Christians, there's actually a very helpful chart that shows this. I think slightly more than half of the world's Christians are Catholic. And then you have another big chunk that are Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox. And then you have a bunch of different Protestant denominations that are all very small in the global scheme of Christianity and that don't actually agree even with one another on Eucharistic theology. So you can find books like, I think Zondervan has different perspectives on the Eucharist, kind of a compilation of essays from disagreeing Protestants on what they think happens in the Lord's Supper or in the Eucharist. So if you look at that and say, okay, well, overwhelmingly, like 3/4 of this pie chart all believes that Christ is really, truly present, and then the remaining quarter doesn't actually agree with itself, that by itself seems to point in one direction. And that's just today. If you were to say, let's look at historic Christianity, let's look at the first 2/3 or 3/4 of the existence of the church on earth and say, for the first 1,500 years, what did people believe about the Eucharist? It's just overwhelming that they believe Catholic things about the Eucharist. They believe Christ is really present, that he's present by a mode that's eventually called transubstantiation, that we are to offer him worship, that this is a sacrifice. In my book, The Eucharist is Really Jesus, and in my book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, I talk about this in both contexts. I think of the two of those, the early church was the Catholic Church might be more pertinent to your question because you can see, I think, pretty clearly that within the first 200 years of Christianity that this is what Christians believed. So if you want to give us your number, I'd be happy to give you a copy of that book if you'd like us to send it your way.
Yeah, Aaron, I hope that question was helpful. If you instead of giving us your number, I've put you back on hold. You can talk to Darren, who screened your call, and you can just give him a mailing address. And
that's what I meant. We can't send a book to a phone number.
That's right. We can't. Maybe 30 years ago we could fax it page by page, but that would be a waste of time and resources. So instead, we will just send you the book to your mailing address, Aaron. So again, like I said, I'll put you back on hold, and you talk to Darren, and he will get your mailing address, and we'll send you that book. The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, free of charge. Thanks so much for calling in, Aaron. William now is calling from Western Utah, listening on YouTube. William, thanks for your patience. You are on the air with Joe Heschmeyer. Go ahead.
Hey, Joe. How's it going? I run an apologetics club here in West Jordan, Utah. I managed to go to your debate. Had a really good time. Unfortunately, not happy about the way that Jacob approached things, but that's okay. My question is, so my dad and I have this joke. He's SDA. This joke that Christ managed to turn water into wine, but the LDS turned it back into water again. So my question is kind of related to that. Why do you think Christ chose specifically bread and wine instead of something like a hunk of lamb and like lamb blood pudding? Like, why specifically bread? I kind of understand the bread of presence, and I understand like the physical distinction of how wine can look like blood. But why bread and why wine? Because it seems a little bit ambiguous to associate with the flesh and blood of Christ.
Yeah, there are several reasons, and we're actually given some of them in Scripture. I just did an episode on why Paul continues to speak of the Eucharist as like the one bread or the one loaf, even after the consecration. Like, is he denying the real presence? And the answer is no, but he is emphasizing that Christ is the one loaf, arton in Greek. And we actually see this even in places like Mark chapter 8, where the disciples have no loaves in the bread, and no loaves in the boat, but there is one loaf, meaning Jesus, who's there with them. And then he warns them about the leaven of the Pharisees. So the whole thing is rich in bread being used in a sort of metaphorical way for spiritual realities. In one case, the flesh of Christ. In another case, the spiritual immorality of the Herodians and the Pharisees. And so there's a fascinating thing. And then he points them to the miraculous nature of the multiplication of loaves. All that's in Mark 8. Then you have in John 6 where he says that the bread that I'll give for the life of the world is my flesh. So in that sense, it's almost maximally unambiguous. He just says outright, the bread is my flesh. And then at the Last Supper, when he lifts what appears to be bread and declares it to be his flesh, he does it again. And so that all seems very clear. But why these species? Like, he could have used anything, as you say, he could have used lamb. Several reasons. One involves the manna. So John 6 talks about this, that the manna, which the Psalms calls bread from heaven, prefigures Christ, who is the true bread from heaven. And so that's one reason. Two, there's this connection to the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's very clear the Last Supper takes place at Passover. John 6 also takes place at Passover time. I believe it's John 6, verse 4 that mentions this detail. Three, there's a quality to bread, which is that all these different pieces of wheat appear to die, and then they bear fruit. Jesus talks about this. And additionally, the wheat is gathered together to form one loaf. Remember, we are one body because we partake of the one loaf, meaning we all partake of the one Eucharist. We don't literally have the same loaf of bread, but just as individual grains of wheat are ground together to form a single substance bread, so you and I are ground together by dying with Christ and form the one body of Christ. And unless we die, we'll bear no fruit. And then additionally, bread and wine and oil are the three staples of the Jewish diet. So these are the three foods, there are two foods and a drink, I suppose, that have special meal blessings. So there's a generic prayer that you'd pray before a meal, and then there's a special blessing for bread, for wine, for oil, because these were the staples of a Jewish diet. And so all throughout Jesus' life, he would have eaten bread, he would have drunk wine, and by metabolism, he would have turned that bread into his body, and he would have turned that wine into his blood. And at the Last Supper, he does supernaturally what he'd been doing his whole life naturally through metabolism. In the same way that at the wedding feast of Cana, he turns water into wine. But you know what else turns water into wine? Grapes. C.S. Lewis makes this point in his book Miracles, that all of Jesus' miracles in the New Testament resemble in some way the natural order. They don't flaunt it like turning stone into bread. They don't kind of make a mockery of it in that sense. And they don't just go in a kind of zany direction like turning a pumpkin into a stagecoach. Rather, there's this family style, hereditary style is what Lewis calls it, between what the Father has done in the natural order and what the Son has done in the supernatural order. So those are a bunch of different reasons. The last one would just be bread does vaguely look like flesh. Wine does less vaguely look like blood. So I'm sure there's more reasons, but those are ones that we find in Scripture and in the Fathers. What would you say to all that?
I would say that sounds great. Have you thought about writing a book on Mormonism and the claims of Mormonism by chance?
I have. Isaac Hess has pressed me on this several times, and once I get a little more free time, I would love to do that. But we'll see.
All right, so in 5 or 10 years or so.
If you want to stay on the line, we can get you a copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus. How about that?
Yeah, go ahead, William. Stay on the line, and just like the last caller, Darren will get your mailing information and send you a copy of Joe's book, The Eucharist is Really Jesus. Thanks so much for calling, William. That opens up another line as we go into our next break. 888-318-7884 is the number to call. 888-318-7884 to ask Joe Heschmeyer any question you have on the Eucharist. My name is Thomas Graff. We are halfway through this show, and I will be back to continue filling in for Cy Kellett on the other side of this break. See you right after that. Hello, and welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Thomas Graff's social media manager here at Catholic Answers, filling in for Cy Kellett. On a show so nice, we got to do it twice. Had such a great time with Joe Heschmeyer answering questions about the Eucharist in the first hour. We decided, let's run it back. Let's do it all over again. We got a lot more callers on the line waiting to talk to Joe about the Eucharist, and they're all full. I'll give out the number anyway, just in case someone drops out. It's 888-318-7884. Call that number over and over again, because you might be able to slip in when someone drops off the line. But that is the number, 888-318-7884. Joe, I mentioned earlier, plugged Shameless Popery, of course, as we should do. And, of course, I completely neglected to mention that more recent than the episode I was pumping up is an episode you put out that is actually about the Eucharist itself. So why don't you tell the people what that episode is about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's actually very similar to one of the calls that already happened. And so St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 and 11 uses the term bread, and specifically loaf, arton, to describe Christ present in the Eucharist even after the consecration. And out of context, that sounds like, oh, well, I guess it's just bread. When you look at the actual words he's saying, where he calls it a participation in the body of Christ and a participation in the blood of Christ, and warns that those who receive it unworthily will be damned, it's clear he's not just talking about ordinary bread, that rather he seems to be using bread in the same way that the Gospels use bread. Like when Jesus describes himself as the bread of life, we don't think that he means he is literally bread. So we would say there he's using a very obvious image that the bread that Jesus will give for the life of the world is his flesh, and that he is our one bread, he is our one loaf. That when we say like one bread, one body, this is not a denial of transubstantiation. This is pointing to this well-established biblical image for Christ, given to us by Christ himself.
Shameless Popery on YouTube, Shameless Popery wherever you get your podcasts. I've actually pulled up the YouTube page in front of me so I can tell you everyone what the exact title is this time. It's Do St. Paul's Words Disprove the Catholic Eucharist? So if you want a much deeper dive into what you just heard from Joe there, go to Shameless Popery, again, on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Joe, ready to dive back into calls?
Yeah, let's do it.
Then let's dive to Oklahoma, where the John from Oklahoma, regular caller, glad to have him back again, listening on Sirius XM, is calling. John, welcome back to the show.
Hey, man, first caller, second hour, I'll take it. I love it.
Teeing it right up for us. Good job.
Nice. Now, I am very excited about Lent coming up because you had mentioned Lent. This is the very first Lent as an actual Catholic that I'm going to
Hey, let's
through,
go.
and I am just ecstatic. Yes.
That's wonderful.
Ah, man. So I love the Eucharist. I love the Eucharistic adoration. I go, because I'm a truck driver, I go to as many adoration chapels or adorations in the main church that I can find whenever I go to a place to deliver. And I just love it and the importance of it. I can't stress it enough. If they want to grow in their Catholicism and in their faith, go to Eucharistic adoration.
Amen.
I mean, it will absolutely change you.
Amen.
But here's my question. When did the practice of Eucharistic adoration actually begin?
It's a slightly tricky question because we have monks in the early days of the church from at least like the 300s who we know reserved the Eucharist in their cell. So if you're a monk living in the desert and you live in a little cell by yourself and you're not a priest who can consecrate the Eucharist, then you need to receive the Eucharist from someone else. And so they would receive the Eucharist and be able to communicate themselves periodically after that. And so we know that they had the Eucharist reserved in their cell. We know of some other cases, I believe Basil the Great did this as well, where he saved a portion of the Eucharist in a reserved place, also in the 300s. And so that, I think, would be the earliest evidence we have of the Eucharist being reserved. Also in the 300s, there's a reference Ambrose gives in a funeral homily for his brother, where he talks about his brother having been on a ship, and when the ship sunk, they have the Eucharist wrapped up in a cloth. I think the English translation says a napkin, but it means like a cloth. And he wraps this around his neck and he floats to sea knowing that God will protect him. So it seems that there is some reservation of the Eucharist on this ship as well. As with a monk in the desert, a sailor at sea can't make it to Mass in the ordinary way. And so it makes sense that the Eucharist would be stored on board. So that seems to be some of our earliest evidence of the Eucharist being reserved, how people acted towards it in terms of offering set prayers. A lot of our knowledge of the particular prayers comes much later. That's partly the nature of prayer. People don't usually write down their prayers in any kind of concrete or systematic way, unless it's a group kind of liturgical prayer. But something like adoration, if you were to say, in the last 5 years, how many of my prayers at adoration have been written down? Probably not many. So when we're dealing with the history here, we know we're dealing with kind of a piecemeal history, because not only is most papyrus gone, but in particular, prayer is the kind of thing that often is not very well preserved in the historical record, even though we know it happens, the kind of details of it. But even, so I mentioned those examples from the 300s, but if you go back even earlier to like the 100s, Justin Martyr talks about, I believe it's the deacons who would bring the Eucharist to the sick. So that suggests that there are people who reserved the Eucharist outside of Mass, at least for the purpose of bringing it to the sick. We don't really know all the details of what that looked like in terms of where they kind of stored the Eucharist. The idea of a standing tabernacle in the church is slightly later. I believe shortly after the First Council of Nicaea in 325, there's more of a push for having an appropriate place for the Eucharist in those contexts that is, that fits the dignity of the Eucharist. So pretty early on, but the exact details of that are somewhat murky. And then a lot of what we think of now with adoration, in terms of being more of like you have benediction and those prayers, a lot of those prayers are actually much later into, like the Middle Ages.
John, does that help you out?
When did the monstrance come into play? When did they decide to add a monstrance?
I may be wrong about this. I believe 9th century, something like that. And so monstrance comes from the word monstrare, to show. And so it's a way of displaying the Eucharist. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it is something like the 9th century. But I could be completely wrong about that.
John, you might have stumped Joe. Ooh,
yeah.
Tough.
Hey, man. Wow. Oh.
I know. I don't want to commit too much just in case, because again, this is one of those things where like the particulars of how the Eucharist is stored and displayed in this case, you're going to have diversity of style, and we're going to be limited in what we know in terms of the archaeological and historic record.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks so much for that call, John. Always lovely to hear from you. Thanks for kicking us off on that first hour. That was a great answer by Joe. Much better than the answer I would have given to when did Eucharistic adoration start. I would have just said the first Christmas. But that I don't think that's what John wanted to know. If you want to know.
After benediction?
The first Christmas after benediction.
No, I'm saying Eucharistic adoration starts after you do benediction.
Oh, thank you, Joe. See, I was too dumb to even get that.
Every time you go to adoration, yeah.
Yes, that's when it starts. That's when it starts. See, and if you want to know why none of those answers are what John was looking for, just rewind to the very beginning of this show where we talked about modes of presence, and then and then you'll understand why. So that brings us mercifully to our first break. I do need to let you know before we go. There's one thing we should all be doing, but probably aren't, or not enough. Two things, actually. I'm not eating enough vegetables. But the other thing we should be doing, but probably aren't, is talking about Jesus with anyone at all. Evangelizing, fulfilling the call to evangelize, spreading the good news about Jesus Christ. And we want to help you do that. We want to help you get the confidence and the know-how and just a little bit of skills that you can use to talk about Jesus with anyone. So we published a book titled How to Talk About Jesus with Anyone. It's by Cy Kellett, the host that I'm filling in for, and Steve Dawson, the founder of St. Paul Street Evangelization. If you go to our website, talkaboutjesusbook.com, talkaboutjesusbook.com, you can order that for only $4 in bulk. So a bulk order of, I believe, probably 20 books for $4 each. You can also order it in single, in any format you want. Talkaboutjesusbook.com will teach you tested techniques for planting seeds and saving souls. How to talk about Jesus with anyone. Talkaboutjesusbook.com. Visit it today, and you can start. You can continue the work of evangelization that saints and doctors and thousands and millions of Christians have done throughout the ages. We will be right back to talk more about the Eucharist with Joe Heschmeyer right after this.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Hey, this is Michael O'Neill, the Miracle Hunter. I'll be delving into the fascinating world of miracles and taking you on a hunt that explores the greatest mysteries and marvels of the Catholic Church. I'll be examining what constitutes a miracle, how miracles are investigated and approved, and the role they play in the lives of the faithful. We'll look at the miracles of the Gospels and early Christianity, considering the claims of the miraculous in our own modern age.
The Miracle Hunter, Saturday at 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Thomas Graff, the social media manager, filling in for Cy Kellett as he's on the road. We are talking about the Eucharist. It's an Ask Me Anything About the Eucharist hour. Not me, of course. I will not be answering the questions. Joe Heschmeyer will be answering the questions. Staff apologist here at Catholic Answers and author of books like The Eucharist is Really Jesus. That really qualifies Joe to answer any question that you want to throw at him. Except when did the first adoration start? Because then we'll just talk about it in really punny ways, and that doesn't help anyone at all. Joe did give a very good answer to that question, then I just derailed it at the end there.
I looked a little bit, by the way, on the break on monstrances.
Oh, good.
And I saw something saying that monstrances as we currently have them starting like the 15th century. That seems very late, given that we had things like Corpus Christi, and you have the Eucharist being displayed in other ways. So this might be referring to a particular style of I don't know. So all that's to say, it's a good question.
All that's to say,
I still don't know.
The jury is still out on the monstrance question. Maybe you can write a book on that, and it might sell tens of copies. Let's go now to Joseph, who wants to talk to Joe, calling from Nashville, Tennessee, watching on YouTube. Joseph, welcome to Catholic Answers Live. You're on the air.
Hello, guys. Thank you for taking my call. First things first, Joe, congrats on the last debate. I have shared that Star Wars bit with more people than I can imagine. So very, very good job there.
Thank you.
Now, my
Appreciate
question
that.
for you is actually about, you're welcome, is actually about Holy Thursday, because we talk about the Eucharist as this representation of Calvary, and yet that sacrifice would not have happened yet on Holy Thursday. So should we see the Eucharist of Holy Thursday the same way that we look at the Eucharist now?
He is presenting it to be offered at Holy Thursday. And then when he commands to do this, the priests are participating in this action. So they are representing it. He is presenting it. So there is a difference there. It's the same Christ, of course. St. Thomas Aquinas, if you want to do a much deeper dive on this, Part 3 of the Summa, question 81, talks about the institution of the Eucharist, and he addresses both, did Christ receive his own body, in question 1, in Article 1. In Article 3, he talks about whether he gives himself as a passible or impassible body, because, now the body that he has will never die. But on Holy Thursday, his body was not only capable of dying, it was about to die. And then in Article 4, he talks about what about like on Holy Saturday? How do you make sense of the fact that on Holy Saturday, hypothetically, if the apostles were to offer the Mass on Holy Saturday, what would happen then, since Christ's body is in the tomb? So it's a fascinating question to kind of hypothetically imagine, but I think the easiest basic answer is at Holy Thursday, Christ is presenting his body and blood. And this is relevant Because John 10 makes very clear that no one takes Jesus' life from him. He lays it down freely. And so in sacrificial terms, Jesus is not just the victim of the sacrifice, he is the priest of the sacrifice. If someone just killed Jesus without his consent, that would have done nothing for the salvation of the world. Jesus freely offering himself, giving of himself, laying down his life for his friends, that is the love that is bigger than the weight of all the sins of the world. That's pretty significant. So it's actually not enough for Jesus to be the victim of the sacrifice. He has to be the priest. And I stress this because there are a lot of Protestant theologies, like penal substitutionary atonement, that seem to make Jesus simply the victim and maybe the Father, the priest of the sacrifice, that he's just pouring out his wrath on the Son. But it's not clear that this is self-sacrificial, that Jesus is actually presenting himself to the Father in the sacrifice. And so, this is a critical moment theologically, because Christ is our high priest. And this is the Hebrews talks about this repeatedly. Christ is our high priest, and he begins by making the offering of himself at the Last Supper. So this is an important moment to get. This is where Christ is exercising his high priesthood, and then all earthly priests are simply cooperating in that, following that do this kind of command.
Joseph, how does that help you?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, guys. Have a blessed day.
Yeah, you bet.
You're welcome, Joseph. Thank you for calling in. Let's move on now to Owensboro, Kentucky, where Kevin is listening on Save Your Radio. Kevin, thanks for your patience and waiting to get on the air, and here you are. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. And first, just want to say I appreciate y'all's work, and Joe, really appreciate the videos that you do. They're real thorough.
Thank you.
Appreciate them. My question is, so it's come to my understanding that in John 6, in the original Greek, there's a different word used for eat in verses 54 through 58 that's better understood or translated like as to chew or to munch. I'm just curious why none of our translations use that different word in John 6.
It's tricky because I just pulled up the Strong's Concordance for trogo, which is the word you're talking about there, and it gives it as to gnaw, crunch, chew raw vegetables or fruits as nuts or almonds, and it's used of animals feeding first and then of men second. That's the first definition. The second definition is to eat. So chew is closer to literal. It's not a perfect, but it certainly seems to involve chewing. Even if you look at the structure of where the word comes from, it involves like the chewing action with the teeth and what it does to the teeth. So there's a gnawing, tearing kind of connotation to it. Nevertheless, every time it appears in the New Testament, so most of the time it appears in the New Testament, it's in John 6. It's 4 times there. But there are 2 other times where it's used. John 13:18, he that gnaws my bread, or he that eateth bread with me, as the KJV has. And then the other one is in Matthew 24, where people are eating and drinking in the days of Noah. And there it clearly just means eating and drinking. Eating, and then drinking is given with it. In the context of John 6, this switch of verbiage is a clear intensifier. And so I actually agree with you. I think it'd be great if we had some way of signaling that in the English, because we lose this. In the context of John 6, so for anyone who maybe doesn't have it in front of them, Jesus has talked about the need to eat his flesh. And at first, people thought this was just a metaphor. And when he talks about himself as the bread from heaven, they just think that he means he came from heaven. They don't think any of this stuff about eating is literal at all. But then, beginning in John 6:35, he doubles down on this. He says that he's the bread of life, and then he talks about the need to actually eat his flesh. And that's where they say that he's just, the bread from heaven. They don't think anything particularly of this. But then he says in verse 51, I'm the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread which I shall give for the life of the world is my flesh. So notice he's leaning into the imagery of flesh there. And it's only then, in verse 52, that they first ask, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? Now, there's 2 things to notice there. One, people sometimes say, well, you know what? Why does it matter if people understood Jesus in that way? People misunderstood Jesus all the time. And there's some truth to that. But in all the other examples you can find in the Bible, what you have are cases where people hear something Jesus says, and they immediately rush to kind of the wrong conclusion. And frequently Jesus clarifies. Or if he doesn't, the evangelist will clarify that they're misunderstanding things. But here, they don't rush to the Eucharistic kind of read. They originally just think he's talking about giving them free food, and then they think he means that he just came from heaven, that it's just like the bread part's just a metaphor. He doesn't actually mean to be eaten in any way. And it's only after he keeps reiterating this point that they finally say, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? So that looks like Jesus wants them to think that because he has led them very deliberately down the road to thinking this. And then you look at how he responds to it, and it's really remarkable. As you say, there's a verb switch where he goes from saying something like eat the flesh to gnaw the flesh, where it's a more intensive. But then he also says, and drink his blood. Now, drinking of blood, besides the gross cannibalistic context, you couldn't drink animal blood. You couldn't even have meat with animal blood in it in the Old Testament because it was viewed as a sign of communion in the life of the animal because the life of the thing is in the blood, as Leviticus says. And so you would be communion, like if you had like meat that wasn't thoroughly cooked and it still had blood in it, that was an act of communing in the life of that beast. And that was viewed as bestial. It was beneath your dignity as a human. And so here, when Christ doubles down both by the verb switch for eating, but also doubles down by adding the drinking of blood, I think we miss that, partly because we've maybe heard the verse so many times, partly because we aren't coming from that same Mosaic background, partly because the English translation doesn't use different verbs for eat and to gnaw, but it's really significant. It's right there in John 6:53. And then he does it again in 54. He again says, he eats my flesh and drinks my blood, but it gnaws my flesh and drinks my blood, has eternal life, and I'll raise him up at the last day. So there is this very strong kind of repeated language. And then he says in 55, for my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. So Jesus seems to be doing everything he can to double down on this language, to emphasize in even shocking ways that this is not simply a metaphor, that he means something that's very corporeal. He means something very bodily, and that somehow we need to be receiving his body and his blood, or we're cutting ourselves off from eternal life. We won't be raised up on the last day. So yeah, I think you're right to ask about kind of the verbiage there. There's much more that could be said there, but yeah, what say you, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I heard. I just want to confirm, and I kind of wish we had translations that reflected that. To your point, to help bring it home that there's a change in really meaning to chew as flesh.
Yeah,
I just think
there's the same thing in John 21 where he speaks to Peter 3 times. Simon, do you love me more than these? Simon, do you love me? Simon, do you love me? There's a verb switch in that third one where he goes from the agape to philios. So it's almost like, Simon, do you love me more than these? And then lowers it to, Simon, do you love me? To, Simon, do you like me? And Simon each time responds by using philios. So he's using the much more fraternal kind of love. And we lose all of that in English without a bunch of footnotes, that there is this real, whereas earlier, Peter had very, very bombastically said, like in Luke 22, even if everyone else should deny you, I won't deny you. And Jesus has to tell him that he's going to. In John 21, Peter is chastened and he's humble. And even when he's asked these very big, do you love me more than these? He gives a much smaller kind of answer. And it explains why the third time Peter would be hurt, both the threefold denial and the threefold affirmation, but also because Jesus is asked, is even that much true, basically? And given Peter a chance to confess him 3 times after having denied him 3 times.
Kevin, thank you so much for your call. We appreciate you calling in. Call back anytime. That opens up another line. 888-318-7884 is the number to call. Joe, maybe for like the casual reader of Scripture who wants to not have all this nuance lost on him when he's reading the Bible, what can we do you think?
Yeah, there is unfortunately just a certain limitation in reading the Bible in translation. I mean, one answer would just be learn Greek, but that's obviously not going to be an adequate answer for most people. But I would say read the footnotes for one, because many times the footnotes will include this kind of information. Read commentaries, read those kind of things, because you can often find things in the text that maybe are hard to convey in English, or maybe things we've just overlooked. And so this can help us to have a greater appreciation of what's actually being talked about in the Bible.
888-318-7884 is the number to call. We'll be right back with more about the Eucharist right after this.
Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic. And Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
What is the Catholic Church? Everyone seems to have an opinion, but the Church never quite fits into the boxes people make for it. In The Faith Unboxed, author Andrew Petiprin looks at some of the most common boxes people put the Catholic Church in and explains why they don't fit. In doing so, he brings us closer to what the Church really is, the institution founded by Christ. Order The Faith Unboxed today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We're talking to Joe Heschmeyer about the Eucharist today. 888-318-7884 is the number to call, but the lines are all full right now. Keep calling just in case someone drops out. You might be able to slip in. My name is Thomas Graff. I'm taking a break from my social media duties to fill in for Cy Kella today. And our next caller comes from Boston, Massachusetts. His name is John. He's listening on the EWTN app. John from Boston, thank you for calling in.
Blessings, everyone. Blessed Feast of St. Agnes. 3 quick things. Please, listeners, support Catholic Answers, support EWTN. How can you put a price on the salvation of the soul?
Amen. Give.catholic.com. Givecatholic.com.
Yeah. Both of you. I am struggling with the English language with the word this. I mean, the profound mystery. I know that would probably be the answer for the word this. I'm trying to understand, I guess, in English grammar, during those sacred words at the transubstantiation on the altar, this is my body. I don't like the word this. It's so vague to me. So, if you could provide both an English lesson to that and, of course, its meaning in terms of the Most Holy Sacrament. And just a quick footnote, perhaps the first pix was cloth, as you mentioned about the Most Holy Sacrament being put into a cloth. St. Tarcissus guarded the Eucharist next to his heart in a cloth before he was martyred.
It's true.
But anyways.
It's true. Yeah, he was bringing the Eucharist to the sick. So we certainly know, and he wasn't even the earliest to do that. We have evidence from the 100s. So there was presumably some means of transporting the Eucharist reverently and securely. But yeah, so in terms of this is my body, this is my blood of the covenant, that's the language in Matthew 26. We're told Jesus took bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, take, eat, this is my body. So if the question is, what does this refer to? Well, whatever it is, he has just given to the disciples. It had been bread, and then he blesses it, he breaks it, and he gives it. And then he declares something new. He no longer says, this is bread. He says, this is my body. So the referent in technical language, the referent there is the distributed thing that looks like bread that they've just received. And similarly, when he takes a cup filled with wine, he lifts it up and he says, drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant. Now, contextually, we know that he doesn't mean the cup, he means the contents of the cup, that what had previously been wine is now the blood of the covenant. So I think that you determine the meaning of this just from context. Like if I point to a kid and say, this is my son, you can tell from the context of me pointing to them that this refers to the one I'm pointing at. So likewise, when he's holding up the bread and holding up the wine, and then he prays over them, and then declares, this is my body, this is the blood of the covenant, that seems to clearly indicate what it is that he's talking about there. What do you think of that, John?
Yes, very good. Then I ask pardon. I don't even know how to phrase it. I thought that this was timeless, and then a connection to subject and object of the sentence. I said I wasn't an English teacher with this.
Sure.
And I agree. I agree with the context. I agree with the reference. I agree with the logic and the chronology. And that's beautiful, and that's simple. And we have the command, take, right? But I still wrestle with the word this. I'm sorry.
Okay. Oh yeah, it's interesting. This was actually one of the things, strikingly, that the language there is what helped Luther to maintain as much of his Eucharistic theology as he did, even though he drifted. He didn't drift as far as some of the other Protestants did, and he just kept going back to is means is. That when Jesus holds up the host and says, this is my body, we don't find him ever doing anything like that. Now, Jesus will say, like, I'm the bread of life, I'm the sheep gate, I'm the good shepherd. He'll do that, but he never just like picks up a shepherd and says, this is me, or picks up a door and says, this is me. But here, when he's lifting, like, he doesn't ever use props like that and declares them to be himself. And so what's striking is that people who say this is all a metaphor have to say that in John 6, when Jesus says that the bread that he'll give for the life of the world is his flesh, he's using one set of metaphors there. He is, metaphorically going to be eaten. When he talks about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, that's, fascinatingly, you'll find Protestants who say that's not even about the Eucharist. That's a totally unrelated thing. And then at the Eucharist, when he uses the exact same sounding language, they think, well, that just means that the bread and wine represent his body and blood. Whereas before, the body and blood was literal, but the eating and the drinking was not literal. And so it's fascinating where you have to interpret these as two completely different metaphors that mean completely different things. One means something like in John 6, it means like believe or something. And at the Last Supper, it means this represents my body, but isn't really. And you just think, okay, these are very similar kind of moments. They both happen at Passover, a year apart. And Jesus is describing the need to eat his flesh and drink his blood in the context of bread. That just feels like too big of a coincidence to divorce those things. So I would say on this score, and maybe not too many others, Martin Luther is dead on. Is means is. And so when he says, this is my body, we should take that quite seriously.
John, thanks so much for that call. We got to move along because we have a lot more callers that we want to get to. Next up is Kevin calling from North Bend, Washington, listening on the Catholic Answers app. Kevin, thanks for hanging on. You're on the air now with Joe Heschmeyer.
Hey guys, thanks for taking my call. So I was raised LDS or Mormon until high school, and then I converted to Christianity at my Protestant university a couple of years ago, and now I'm in OCIA. So Joe, I just wanted to say thank you for your just outreach and willingness to interact with the LDS community and just do it in, in good faith and trying to bring them towards Jesus.
I really appreciate that a lot.
Like puns.
I do.
I know you like puns, so can I tell you a lighthearted, friendly Mormon joke?
Okay, let's.
Careful.
I'm going to just give it a disclaimer. I don't know what he's going to say,
Careful.
So if anyone's offended,
okay.
Kevin in North Bend, you can find him.
Mormon jokes are okay, but puns might get you dropped. So we'll see.
I love all my LDS brothers and sisters. Okay, why did the Mormon have to eat his steak from a bowl?
Why?
Why did the Mormon have to eat his
steak? Because the angel Moroni took the plates to heaven.
That's
gotcha.
So dumb, but I like it a lot.
Yeah, par for the course for jokes with Joe.
I know. Okay.
Yeah. You found the right audience
thanks
there,
for liking that.
Kevin.
You did. You did.
All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And so for my question, so in OCA, I've been taught that the Eucharist is our highest form of worship of God. And given really the enlightening claim I've heard from you, Joe, and from others that Protestants, though often well-intentioned, have an insufficient understanding of worship, can you explain to me the importance of the Eucharist as a sacrifice and what exactly that means?
Yeah, I'm going to give a little background, although it sounds like maybe you already know part of what I'm about to say. Biblically, there are three things that are distinguished that for many ordinary Christians we've kind of muddled together. Like if you ask people about their Sunday worship, they often have a kind of mix of what they even think that means. So these are all good things, by the way. I'm not knocking any of these. In Luke 4, Jesus goes to the synagogue. He opens up the scriptures. He preaches them from Isaiah. He then explains the scriptures to them. He's preaching and he's teaching. The synagogue is a place that he's in the habit of going. We're told that in Luke 4. But he does not regard it as a place of prayer or a place of worship. One of the ways we know that is he doesn't ever call it a place of worship or a place of prayer. And in fact, the only time prayer and the synagogue get mentioned together is in Matthew 6, when Jesus says, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners. So the only thing we're told is don't pray in the synagogue. And the reason was, in the first century, before the destruction of the temple, the synagogue was not viewed as a house of prayer. The temple was. And there's plenty of actually archaeological evidence and Jewish research on this. Rabbi Reuven Hammer, I talk about him in my book, The Eucharist is Really Jesus. He looks at an ancient synagogue inscription that talks about what the synagogue was for. It's in the writing of the people in the first century, and there's no reference to prayer or worship whatsoever. That's not what it was for. It was a place to gather and read the Torah and talk about it, and for visitors to come and stay. So again, none of those things are bad, but it's more like what we would say today, like a parish hall. The contrast then would be to the second activity, which is praying. In teaching and preaching, you're talking about God. You want to do that in front of a lot of people. Praying, Jesus doesn't tell you to go try to do it in front of a bunch of people. That's what the hypocrites do. Because in praying, you're talking to God. So you can do that anywhere, but he tells you to go into your room to pray. I mean, we find Jesus praying all over the place. So that's everywhere. But then there's this third thing called worship. In John 4, the Samaritan woman who's on Mount Gerizim, the holy mountain for the Samaritans, asked Jesus about this. And she says to him, this is John 4, verse 20. She says, "Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you say that in Jerusalem is a place where men ought to worship." So something is happening in Jerusalem, more specifically in the temple, that she is calling worship. What is that? It's sacrifice. And Jesus knows this. As Everett Ferguson points out, sacrifice is the language of worship in the ancient world. This is the primary way that people gave something to God. So you're not just talking about God as in teaching. You're not just asking God for things or talking to him as in praying. You're going even beyond that and making offerings to God. And this is what sacrifice is. This is what the whole Old Testament sacrificial system was about. This is what the cross is about. Jesus is giving something to the Father. Perfect obedience, his own life, this everlasting love. This is an offering. And the question then becomes, how do we as Christians participate in the offering, the sacrifice, the worship that Jesus offers to the Father? And the answer, in part, is that we eat the sacrifice. So, two things. One, I don't mean to just discount that we can worship God in other ways as well. We can make sacrifices in our bodies, and that's also worship. Romans 12:1. He says this is our spiritual worship. When you make sacrifices in the temple of your body, you are acting as a priest in that temple, your body, and you're making sacrifices that's pleasing to God. But as St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10, we can partake of the body and blood of Christ. And he compares it to the Jewish temple sacrifices and the pagan food sacrifices. And longish story medium, in the Old Covenant, the way you participated in a sacrifice was typically not by killing the animal. The priest did that. It might not even be by owning the animal. So for instance, like the Passover, it's a family meal, and it's okay if you can't afford a lamb yourself. You can share with the neighbor. So how do you participate in that sacrifice? By eating it. And so there's a whole realm of sacrifices that this is true for, and that's the image that Paul draws on to explain what's happening in the Eucharist. That this is the way that we participate in the body and blood of Christ is by eating his sacrificial offering. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, do me a favor. If you stick around, I'm going to send you a copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus, because I've got a chapter that goes into way more depth on this than I was able to kind of cover in this briefish answer.
That's right, Kevin. Just stay on the line. Darren, who you talked to earlier, when he's screened your call, he will get your information and he will send you a copy of this beauty right here, The Eucharist is Really Jesus, where you can learn even more about what Joe just gave you a little cliff notes on. To answer your question. Thanks so much for your call, Kevin. And anyone else who's listening who wants to get a copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus or any other of Joe Heschmeyer's books or any of the books we sell in general can go to shop.catholic.com right now, where we've got a store-wide discount going on, a whopping 26% discount store-wide. The 2026 26% discount store-wide. Just enter promo code SAVE26 at checkout. That's SAVE26 at checkout. And we'll take 26% off any purchase of $26 or more. So load up your cart with $26 or more of any shop.catholic.com goodies. Just like I said, Joe's book, The Eucharist is Really Jesus. The early church was the Catholic Church. Pope Peter, that ought to get you up above 26, all those three together. And put in SAVE26 at the checkout, and we will take 26% off that order. But this deal ends Sunday, 5 days away. 26% is a pretty awesome discount store-wide, so go to shop.catholic.com now in the next 5 days, and you can take advantage of that discount. Shop.catholic.com, SAVE26 at checkout. We will be right back to wrap up this last segment of this show with Joe Heschmeyer right after this.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
This is Father John Bonavita Cola. There are many Catholic Christians who turn on the radio and they want to hear something spiritual, something about faith. So it's critical that in every area we can have Catholic radio, and that we as Catholics will continue to support this great work and for bringing the message of the gospel, the message of our beautiful Catholic faith to everyone.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Been a great time hanging with you all and with Joe Heschmeyer as he answers questions about the Eucharist. Had a lot of callers on the line, and we want to get through as many as we can now, so we will head right down to Midland, Texas, where Clayton has been patiently waiting on YouTube. Clayton, thanks so much for waiting. You are on the air with Joe Heschmeyer. Go ahead with your question.
Thanks for taking my call. How are you, Joe?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I kind of have two questions. So my first is, have you ever, there's kind of a popular Protestant kind of apologetics book called Reasoning from the Scriptures with Catholics. I'm just wondering, first off, if you have ever read that, or I know I'm reading The Case for Catholicism by Trent right now, and he kind of sometimes quotes from it. I'm wondering if you have ever read that.
I'm trying to remember if this is Ron Rhodes.
Yes, it is.
They're two very similar books. They both look similar and are content-wise very similar. I think I've read part of that book. I don't think I've read that one thoroughly. Mm-hmm. But I'm familiar with the book in general.
Okay. Well, anyway, so I've been reading it, and I'm kind of just learning about what the other questions are from the Protestant side. And one of the questions as to the Eucharist is from the book, and it says, if every Catholic church all over the world has Mass every Sunday, wouldn't Jesus' human body have to be omnipresent?
I mean, first, no. It'd be multi-present if that was the right understanding of presence, but it's not. So it's a good question. I want to be very clear about that. And I actually alluded to this in the very first question that I answered at the top of last hour, that this is very similar to a question that Gregory Nyssa addresses in the Great Catechism in the mid-300s. So this is just a good sign that people who are objecting in this way are raising the historic objections that the enemies of Christianity raised against the early Christians. And I think it is worth addressing in those terms. Like, you're attacking the historic Christian belief in the Eucharist in the exact same way that the enemies of Christianity did. That doesn't automatically mean you're wrong, but it kind of suggests you're maybe on the wrong track. So there's a technical answer to this. And the technical answer is that Christ is present in different ways. And so, where two or three are gathered, he is present, but that doesn't mean that he's leaving the right hand of the Father and returning to earth in the way that he will at the second coming. That makes sense so far?
Yes, it does.
Like, we are present to each other in a certain way now by phone. And I'm present with Thomas by video right now. And I'm present in a different way if somebody was in the room with me. So you can be present in multiple ways at the same time. And this is true just with us in our humanity, just with technology. And of course it's true for God. So this idea that Christ cannot be bodily present in multiple ways is actually insulting to the power of Christ. Ligonier Ministries has a devotional called The Presence of Christ in the Lord's Supper. And they argue that even in his glorified state, the human nature of Christ is still limited in ways that are not a consequence of the fall. His physical body, one of the aspects of his human nature, is localized in heaven. It can be no more omnipresent than our human bodies can be. Now, that strikes me as a bold claim to claim like it is impossible for God to make his body present. Nevertheless, the real issue here is that we don't believe the Eucharist is the local presence of God. That we don't believe that Jesus leaves heaven bodily at every Mass. This is an argument that is sometimes thrown at Catholics based on a very misleading quotation from a book called The Faith of Millions from 100 years ago. And so people like James White will quote this book out of context. But even the author of that book is clear. We don't literally think Jesus is leaving heaven every time there's a Mass, or else every Mass would be Armageddon. Like, the issue wouldn't actually be omnipresence, because that's not true. The issue would be if Jesus became locally present, where his body left heaven to arrive on earth. That's the event we call the second coming. That rather he makes himself bodily present through the sacrament of the Eucharist. That's different than him leaving heaven. That in a way, when you receive Jesus bodily in the Eucharist. You're receiving the Jesus who is right now enthroned in heaven bodily in the Eucharist, not that Jesus is leaving heaven to come to earth. Does that distinction make sense?
It does, very much.
Good. So that's what I would say to that. That like his body, just like, Thomas can see my body right now through the medium of video, and it's still a sort of kind of mode of bodily presence, but it's not as if I was there in the room with him. Christ isn't present like that, but it at least highlights the fact that you can be present in multiple ways. You can even be bodily present in multiple ways.
Clayton, thanks so much for that question. We do have to move along. We want to get as many people answered as we can before we have to go. Nathan is listening in Jackson, Mississippi on 107.9 FM. Nathan, you are on the air with Joe Heschmeyer. Go ahead with your question.
Oh.
Hi, Nathan, do we have you?
Hello? Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, we got you now,
We hear you now.
All right. Well, thank y'all for taking my call.
Happy to.
Well, so I just give a little backstory. I've been raised Southern Baptist my whole life. I'm 25 years old, and but the past year I have been kind of discerning what denomination I should go to, kind of trying to figure out the truth. And thanks to you, Joe, and many others, I've actually been looking really deep into the Catholic Church.
Beautiful.
And I'm probably going to become Catholic, but
awesome.
Glory.
Praise God.
I guess one of my question was, why does the church, like obviously every parish gives out the body portion of the Eucharist, but why does the church allow certain parishes to not give out the blood portion of it?
Yeah, there is a doctrine called concomitance, which is that Jesus is fully present in the Eucharist, both in the host and in the chalice, because his body, blood, soul, and divinity is actually united by virtue of the resurrection. So when you receive the Eucharist, you're not just receiving Jesus' body cut off from his divinity, or his body cut off from his humanity, his body cut off from his blood. You're receiving all of him, divinity and humanity, present in this bodily way in the Eucharist. And so whether you receive either or both species, you're receiving Jesus. And so you're not getting less of Jesus. It's more sacramentally significant in terms of the sign value to receive both. But in terms of the validity of the Eucharist, you can do one or either. The priest receives both, but the laity are not required to. And there's nothing actually required. Like the do this is Jesus' command to the priests. We're never actually commanded to receive both, which is significant, I suppose. And then there's some prudential reasons. Like if you offer both, there is an increased risk of spill. You have to have more ministers of Holy Communion, and so it can become a little more chaotic. And so some churches decide just to offer the host, or in some cases, the chalice will be offered to people who may be insensitive to gluten as well. So that is a prudential reason left to the parishes for their own discretion. But that's why, like you whichever way you receive, the priest is going to receive both, and whether you receive either or both, you are still receiving all of Jesus.
Nathan, does that help you out?
Okay. Yeah, and I guess I know other Protestants will use the argument of at the Last Supper, I believe is what it was. He said Jesus said that do both of them.
Yeah, but he's speaking to his priests there, and his priests do receive both.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I guess that would be your response, is because he's talking to the apostles, which would be the priests and stuff like that, and so not just the laity.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
He doesn't give explicit commands for how the laity are to receive at all. And so for a lot of church history, in the West at least, the laity received just under one kind. It's fine to receive under either and both. Real quick, because I know there's two callers who didn't get a chance to get their question answered. Jeff wanted to know Eucharistic prayers. Priests can decide which one to use, and they often don't do the fourth one because it's long. And then Marie is pointing, Benzie is pointing out that in Exodus, after the blood of the covenant is presented, the elders went up and behold Christ and ate and drank, which is significant in prefiguring the Eucharist.
Look at that.
Beautiful.
Joe answering questions with 15 seconds to spare. Thanks for a great show, Joe.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for listening. We'll be right back with you tomorrow, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.